Trasyanka or trasyanka refers to a mixed form of speech in which Belarusian and Russian elements and structures alternate in rapid succession. There is a similar phenomenon in Ukraine and Ukrainian Russian language mixture, called surzhyk. Etymology: in Belarusian the word literally means low-quality hay, when indigent farmers mix fresh grass with the yesteryear's dried hay. The word acquired the second meaning relatively recently, in the second half of the 1980s, when a series of publications in the literary newspaper Literatura Mastaktiva criticized developments in the use of the Belarusian language under Soviet rule. Zianom Parsniak is often said to be the one who has popularized the use of the word for the Belarusian-Russian language mixture. For the Belarusian-Russian borderland, it has been reported that the phenomenon usually referred to by the term trasyanka is called meshanka instead. History: mixed speech in pre-Soviet and early Soviet era. In the area of present-day Belarus, the mixing of speech has a relatively long history. This is because the Belarusian territories were for a long time borderlands in which local dialects contacted with closely related socially dominant languages. Whether such older forms of mixing Belarusian with Russian should be referred to as trasyanka is arguable, as there was no intergenerational transfer of speech in those times. A literary example for this kind of mixing can be found in the 19th century play by Wincenty Dunin Marcinkiewicz, The Gentry of Pinsk. Although it is a piece of art and not a record of everyday speech, it can be assumed that it reflects real language use of that time. A first academic and journalistic debate on Belarusian-Russian mixed speech took place in the 1920s. After World War II, the phenomenon referred to as trasyanka since the 1980s has its origins in the fundamental socio-demographic changes which took place in Soviet Belarus after World War II. In eastern parts of Belarus partially already before World War II, the industrialization of Soviet Belarus led to a massive labor migration from villages to towns. While in 1959 31% of the population lived in towns, in 1990 the share was already 66%. At the same time, ethnic Russians from other parts of the Soviet Union migrated to Soviet Belarus and, in many cases, took on leadership tasks in Belarusian Communist Party administration and state companies. Consequently, the language use of former Belarusian villages and new town dwellers had to accommodate from Belarusian to Standard Russian, a target which was reached seldom though. As a result of this struggle for linguistic accommodation, the so-called trasyanka in its contemporary form emerged, and, moreover, children of its speakers were raised in this mixed Belarusian-Russian variety. Linguistic status. Due to the negative connotation of the word trasyanka, it has been suggested to abandon it in the linguistic debate and use the term Belarusian-Russian mixed speech instead. The scientific discussion on the Belarusian-Russian mixed speech has begun in the first half of the 1990s. Influential Belarusian scholars have pointed out the spontaneous, individual, piecemeal, or even chaotic fashion of Belarusian-Russian speech mixing. These early debates were based mainly on informal observations though, due to a lack of text bodies in the mixed speech. The first empirical case study on the phenomenon has been undertaken only in the early 2000s in the capital Minsk. In the years 2008 to 2013, a research project carried out by linguists and social scientists at the University University of Oldenburg has created two bodies of oral texts in the mixed speech. The linguistic results of the mentioned research project attested the older view that Belarusian Russian mixed speech could yet not be classified as one relatively stable, homogeneous fused lect all over Belarus. On the other hand, on all levels of the linguistic structure, several country-wide relatively stable patterns could be observed which the mixed speech shares with one or both of its donor languages, which, respectively, make the mixed speech differ from both donor languages. Russian elements and traits clearly dominate in the lexicon as well as in morphosyntax. The inflectional morphology is obviously hybridy, and even the pronunciation is influenced by Russian. All in all, the Belarusian Russian mixed speech in its current stage is classified as a complex of regional social dialects. Other studies keep on describing the Belarusian Russian mixed speech as a chaotic and spontaneous phenomenon of language mixing. Sociology of mixed speech use. The sociological and sociolinguistic component of the above-mentioned research project on mixed language use in Belarus showed, inter alia, the following results. Asked about their native language, roughly 38% of around 1,200 respondents named the Belarusian Russian mixed speech, 49% Belarusian and 30% Russian as their first language. Roughly 50% declared the mixed speech, 42% Russian and 18% Belarusian. Finally, as their primarily used language, roughly 55% named Russian, 41% the mixed speech and 4% Belarusian. The results of the research project contradict the popular opinion that the use of Belarusian Russian mixed speech is an indicator for a poor education level and a lack of proficiency in Russian, a Belarusian standard language. The mixed speech is widespread among Belarusians from all educational levels and age groups and used alongside the standard language, which in most cases is Russian. The degree to which individuals tend to approximate their mixed speech used to Russian or, respectively, to Belarusian depends on such factors as interlocutors, conversation, place, topic, etc. Among young Belarusians, the relative weight of mixed speech use decreases in favor of Russian. Phonology. Phonology of Belarusian Russian mixed speech is closer to Belarusian. From the point of view of the Russian speaker, the following distinctions are noticeable. Presence of palatal affricate consonants instead of I. Day instead of quiet instead of, absence of palatalization of the consonant in front of I. Drink instead of, assimilative palatalization of the consonants I. Doors instead of, aspirate i.e. hard hushing sibilants i.e. cup instead of, hard instead of I.e. rag instead of, presence of non-syllabic bilabial in place of etymological and instead of Russian normative in the end of the word i.e. truth instead of, wolf instead of, wrote instead of. Vocabulary. Belarusian Russian mixed speech mostly includes Russian words which have Belarusian analogue shaped by Belarusian phonology and morphology. Some examples of high-frequency Russian words are nouns, verbs, adjectives. Many words have Russian stem, but other morphemes come from Belarusian. Rather small part of vocabulary comes exclusively from Belarusian. Family titles. Some words sound the same in the both languages, or differ by regular phonetic substitutions. Name of some fruits and vegetables. The word professional and urban lexicon are borrowed almost exclusively from Russian. Morphology. Inflection mostly conforms with the norms of Belarusian language. Russian and Belarusian have different norms of declension, especially case declension. For instance, in the instrumental case in Russian, masculine nouns ending in have inflection, while in Belarusian the ending becomes the norm that is present in Belarusian Russian mixed speech. Comparative form can coincide with superlative form of an adjective in Russian. Indefinite pronouns are characterized by the presence of Belarusian stem and Russian suffix, which indicates an object which is unknown. As a rule, verbs in the third person singular miss final, including verbs coming from Russian. Answers: knows, sells. In the infinitive form of Russian, verbs final is replaced with. Postfix is more frequently used, even when Russian norm requires. Started, was afraid, studied. The imperative form is similar to the Belarusian norm. Verbs end in or, which are under stress, i.e.